Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I am back with some more Esoterica. Today's going to be a bit of an odd one. This is not old enough to be part of the Ancient Lore series, but it is based upon some ancient lore. One thing about me is I like to do the research behind the thing before I get involved in any real manner with the thing, and I've been led a lot towards investigating the tarot. Now, it's a little bit weird because I'm not a big one for divination, right? I'm not a big one for all of that, but I do believe that reading the energy is a real thing, that it is a possibility. I do not believe that it is demonic, despite what Christianity might be telling you. And so I'm not necessarily going to get into reading tarot cards myself, but I was very interested in the tarot and the story behind the tarot and what it all means. If you would like somebody who does tarot readings, I will leave a link down below of somebody who does a really good job of reading the energies and telling the things that she interprets from it. Is my friend Helen from over at Cosmic Dragon Tarot. The link will be provided down below, and she has spent a lot more time studying tarot than I have. I wasn't even going to do any videos on tarot yet because I wanted to make sure that I understood what was going on, but something was revealed to me as we went along, and spoiler alert, we're not going to get into that today. That will be another video, probably tomorrow. Today we're going to be talking about the introduction, we're going to be talking about the preface, and we're going to be talking about um, some of the lore attached. I'm going to not get into the actual cards today, but we're going to be talking about the history and the things that are recorded in this book. Now, this book is the Illustrated Key to the Tarot. This came out when they started getting popular again. It's right around 1912, I believe. Uh, the original tarot, in part, appears to be from the 1400s. There doesn't appear to be any reliable sources older than that. This guy has taken a lot of the historical aspects and condensed them into what we're going to be reading today. The part tomorrow is going to be a different kind of interesting, but today we're going to read the Illustrated Key to the Tarot. I know that this is not going to be for everybody, but if you want to join along and hang out, that's cool. We're going to read the preface. We'll be jumping through a lot of different things in this one, right? We're going to get through a good bit of material today. I'm not sure how long it's going to take, but I want to get all of the base material done before I start talking about this whole chart back here that, yeah, that's a thing. The preface. It seems rather, let me get that a little bit bigger for y'all so you can read it too, right? That is a little bit too big, I think. Let's see, right? One click down. There we go. All right. The preface. It seems rather of necessity than predilection, in the sense of apologia, that I should put on record in the first place a plain statement of my personal position, as one who for many years of literary life has been, subject to his spiritual and other limitations, an exponent of the higher mystic schools. It will be thought that I am acting strangely in concerning myself at this day with what appears at first sight and simply a well-known method of fortune-telling. Now, the opinions of some, even in the literary reviews, are of no importance unless they happen to agree with our own. But in order to sanctify this doctrine, we must take care that our opinions and the subjects out of which they arise are concerned only with the highest. Yet it is just this which may seem doubtful in the present instance. Not only to those whom I respect with the proper measures of detachment, but to some of the more real consequence, seeing that their dedications are mine. To these, and to any I would say that after the most illuminated Frater Christian Rosycross had beheld the chemical marriage in the secret palace of transmutation, his story breaks off abruptly, with an intimation that he expected next morning to be doorkeeper. After the same manner, it happens more often than might seem likely that those who have seen the occult powers of nature through the most clearest veils of the sacraments are those who assume thereafter the humblest offices of all about the house of wisdom. By such secret devices also are the adepts and great masters in the secret orders distinguished from the cohort of neophytes, as servi servorum mysteri. See also, or in a way which is not entirely unlike, we meet with the tarot cards at the outermost gates, amidst the fritterings and debris of the so-called occult arts, about which no one in their senses has suffered the smallest deception. And yet these cards belong in themselves to another region, for they contain a very high symbolism, which is interpreted according to the laws of grace rather than by the pretext and intuitions of that which passes for a divination. The fact that the wisdom of God, nature, is foolishness with men does not create a presumption that the foolishness of this world makes any sense for divine wisdom. So neither the scholars in the ordinary classes nor the pedagogues in the seat of the mighty will be quick to perceive the likelihood or even the possibility of this proposition. The subject has been in the hands of cartomanicists as part of the stock and trade of their industry. I do not seek to persuade anyone outside of my own circles that this is of much or of no consequence, but on the historical and interpretative sides it has not fared better. It has been there in the hands of exponents who have brought it into utter contempt for those people who possess philosophical insight or faculties for the appreciation of evidence. It is time that it should be rescued, and this I propose to undertake once and for all, that I may have done with the side issues which distract from the term. As poetry is the most beautiful expression of the things that are of all most beautiful, so is symbolism the most Catholic expression in concealment of things that are most profound in the sanctuary, and that have not been declared outside it with the same fullness by means of the spoken word. The justification of the rule of silence is no part of my present concern, but I have put on record, elsewhere and quite recently, what it is possible to say on this subject. The little treatise which follows is divided into 3 parts, in the first of which I have dealt with the antiquities of the subject and a few things that arise from and connect therewith. It should be understood that it is not put forward as a contribution to the history of playing cards, about which I know and care nothing. It is a consideration dedicated and addressed to a certain school of occultism, more especially in France, as to the source and center of all the phantasmagoria which has entered into expression during the last 50 years, under the pretense of considering tarot cards historically. In the second part, I have dealt with the symbolism according to some of its higher aspects, and this also serves to introduce the complete and rectified tarot, which is available separately in the form of colored cards, the designs of which were added to the present text in black and white. They have been prepared under my supervision in respect to the attributions and meanings by a lady who has high claims as an artist. Regarding the divinatory part by which my thesis is terminated, I consider it personally as a fact in the history of the tarot. As such, I have withdrawn from all published sources a harmony of the meanings which have been attached to the various cards, and I have given prominence to one method of working that has not been published previously, having the merit of simplicity. While it is also of universal application, it may be held to replace the cumbrous and involved systems of the larger handbooks. And so we end the preface, and this was just laying out basically, this is what I intend to talk about in this book. We will talk about more about the actual subjects as we go along, but I wanted to include the preface so that we got the understanding of the workings of his mind, right? He is not necessarily into the divination part of it, but more about correcting the misconceptions that are being attributed to it. He is going through, much like I am, and trying to consolidate information so that it is more readily available and more readily correct, right? That is the point of what he is trying to do here. He steps outside of the mold a bit with this. There is definitely a spirit of you're going to be burned alive in the Catholic Church dealing with tarot, right? It was a means to hide things. People don't necessarily like to think that the church had to be hidden from, but the 1400s, where this was very much involved in, was right about the time of the Reformation, right? This was the breaking apart of the religious systems, and the Catholic Church was a little bit overbearing for several centuries prior to that. We just did Dante's Inferno, where they were talking about how the church had violated a whole lot of things. All right, Next up, Part 1, The Veil and its Symbols. Introductory and General. The pathology of the poet says that the undevout astronomer is mad. The pathology of the very plain man says that the genius is mad. And between these extremes, which stand for 10,000 analogous excesses, the sovereign reason takes the part of a moderator and does what it can. I do not think that there is a pathology of the occult dedications, but about their extravagances no one can question, and it is not less difficult than thankless to act as a moderator regarding them. Moreover, the pathology, if it existed, would probably be an empiricism rather than a diagnosis, and would offer no criterion. Now, occultism is not like mystic faculty, and it very seldom works in harmony with either business aptitude or in the things of ordinary life, or with a knowledge of the canons of evidence in its own sphere. I know that for the high part of ribaldry, there are few things more dull than the criticism which maintains that a thesis is untrue, and cannot understand that it is decorative. I know also that after long dealing with doubtful doctrine or with difficult research, it is always refreshing, in the domain of this art, to meet with what is obviously of fraud, or at least of complete unreason. But the aspects of history, as seen through the lens of occultism, are not, as a rule, decorative, and have few gifts of refreshment to heal the lacerations which they inflict on the logical understanding. It almost requires a frater sapiens dominatabitur astris in the fellowship of the Rosy Cross to have the patience which is not lost amid the clouds of folly when the consideration of the tarot is taken in accordance with the higher law of symbolism. The true tarot is symbolism. It speaks no other language and offers no other signs. Giving the inward meaning of its emblems, they do become a kind of alphabet, which is capable of indefinite combinations and makes true sense in all. On the highest plane, it offers a key to the mysteries, in a manner which is not arbitrary and has not been read in, but the wrong symbolical stories have been told concerning it, and the wrong history has been given in every published work which, so far, has dealt with the subject. It has been intimated by 2 or 3 writers that, at least in respect to the meanings, this is unavoidably the case, because few are acquainted with them, while these few hold by transmission under pledges and cannot betray their trust. The suggestion is fantastic on the surface, for there seems to be a certain anti-climax in the proposition that a particular interpretation of fortune-telling, l'art de tirer les cartes, can be reserved for sons of the doctrine. The fact remains, notwithstanding, that a secret tradition exists reading the tarot, and as there is always the possibility that some minor arcana of the mysteries may be made public with a flourish of trumpets, it will be as well to go before the event and to warn those who are curious in such matters that any revelation will contain only a third part of the earth and sea and a third part of the stars of heaven as in respect of the symbolism. This for the simple reason that neither in root manner nor in development has more been put into writing, so that much will remain to be said after any pretended unveiling. The guardians of certain temples of initiation who keep watch over mysteries of this order have, therefore, no cause for alarm. In my preface to The Tarot of the Bohemians, which, rather by an accident of things, has recently come to be reissued after a long period, I have said what was then possible or seemed most necessary. The present work is designed more especially, as I have intimated, to introduce a rectified set of the cards themselves and to tell the unadorned truth concerning them, so far as this is possible in the outer circles. As regards to the sequence of greater symbols, their ultimate and highest meaning lies deeper than the common language of picture or hieroglyph. This will be understood by those who have received some part of the secret tradition. As regards to the verbal meanings allocated here to the more important trump cards, they are designed to set aside the follies and impostures of past attributions, to put those who have the gift of insight on the right track, and to take care, within the limits of my possibilities, that they are the truth so far as they go. It is regrettable in several respects that I must confess to certain reservations, but there is a question of honor at issue. Furthermore, between the follies on the one side of those who know nothing of the tradition, yet are in their own opinion the exponents of something called occult science and philosophy, and on the other side, between the make-believe of a few writers who have received part of the tradition and think that it constitutes a legal title to scatter dust in the eyes of the world without, I feel that the time has come to say what it is possible to say, so that the effect of current charlatanism and unintelligence may be reduced to a minimum. We shall see in due course that the history of tarot cards is largely of the negative kind, and that, when the issues are cleared by the dissipation of reveries and gratuitous speculations expressed in the terms of certitude, there is in fact no history prior to the 14th century. The deception and self-deception regarding their origin in Egypt, India, or China put a lying spirit in the mouth of the first expositors, and the later occult writers have done little more than reproduce the first false testimony in the good faith of an intelligence unawakened to the issues of research. As it so happens, all expositions have worked within a very narrow range, and owe, comparatively speaking, little to the inventive faculty. One brilliant opportunity has, at least, been missed, for it has not so far occurred to anyone that the tarot may, perhaps, have done duty and even originated as a secret, symbolical language of the Albigensian sects. I commend this suggestion to the lineal descendants of the spirit of Gabriel Rossetti and Eugene Narot, to Mr. Harold Bailey as another new light on the Renaissance, and as a taper, at least in the darkness which, with great respect, might be serviceable to the zealous and all-searching minds of Miss Cooper Oakley. Think only what the supposed testimony of watermarks on paper might gain from the tarot card of the Pope or Hierophant, in connection with the notion of a secret Albigensian patriarch, of which Mr. Bailey has found in these same watermarks so much material to his purpose. Think only for a moment about the card of the High Priestess as representing the Albigensian Church itself, and think of the tower, struck by lightning, as typifying the desired destruction of papal Rome, the city on the 7 hills with the pontiff and his temporal power cast down from the spiritual edifice which it is riven by the wrath of God, nature. The possibilities are so numerous and persuasive that they almost deceive in their expression one of the elect who has invented them. But there is more even than this, though I scarcely dare to cite it. When the time came for the tarot cards to be the subject of their first formal explanation, the archaeologist Court de Gobelin reproduced some of their most important emblems, and, if I may so term it, the codex which he has used, by means of his engraved plates, as a basis of reference for many sets that have been issued subsequently. The figures are very primitive and differ as such from the cards of Atelier, the Marseilles Tarot, and others still current in France. I am not a good judge in such matters, but the fact that every one of the trumps major might have answered for watermark purposes is shown by the cases in which I have quoted, and by one of the most remarkable examples of the Ace of Cups. I should call it an Eucharistic symbol, after the manner of Ciborium, but this does not signify at the moment. The point is that Mr. Harold Bailey gives 6 analogous devices in his new light on the Renaissance, being watermarks on paper of the 17th century, which he claims to be of Albigensian origin, and to represent sacramental and Graal emblems. Had he only heard of the tarot, had he known that these cards of divination cards of fortune, cards of all the vagrant arts were perhaps current at the period in the south of France. I think that his enchanting but all too fantastic hypothesis might have dilated still more largely in the atmosphere of his dream. We should have no doubt, we should no doubt have had a vision of Christian Gnosticism, maniacanism, and all that he understands by pure primitive gospel, shining behind the pictures. I do not look through such glasses, and I can only commend the subject to his attention at a later period. It is mentioned here that I may introduce with an unheard of wonder the marvels of arbitrary speculation as to the history of the cards. With reference to their form and number, it should scarcely be necessary to enumerate them, for they must be almost commonly familiar. But as it is precarious to assume anything, and as there are also other reasons, I will tabulate them briefly as follows. Okay, and we are going to skip that part of it, but we are going to talk just for a second about, he is trying to clarify here, right? Now, the 1400s is just after Dante's Inferno, and Dante was giving us, in my estimation, at least in purgatory, a path towards enlightenment, right? I have talked about that quite extensively and how it seems like he was trying to convey something, at least in the middle. I did not have the keys for the hell. I did not have necessarily the keys for heaven, but I did have the keys for purgatory. And so we talked about it. In this, they're talking about more keys. I think that the same keys fit. I will be talking more about that in the next video, but I do believe that. I don't believe that it was anything to do with the Catholic Church in particular. I do believe that the Catholic Church has a lot of teachings that they do not give you, right? That is also what it was contained in here. It was talking about the symbolism that is not talked about outside of the church, but that absolutely exists within the church. And so a lot of the interpretations were meant to reconcile, right? It was taken for granted that the Bible was truth. I know that this is going to step on toes, but I have a whole Bible study where I talk about how that is not necessarily the case. But the effort was expended to reconcile tarot with Catholicism. A lot of apologetics happened. I don't think that they were necessarily necessary, right? I don't believe that the doctrine of the Catholic Church has anything pretty much at all to do with God himself, right? It has a lot to do with ceremonies and rituals and possibly even enlightenment, but it is only for the few and the select, and whoever we decide should be able to get it. I believe the tarot is severely misunderstood, and that is the reason why I'm doing this video and the next one that is coming, because there is something in here. There is. And it is important to get it out. It is. I'm laying the groundwork here, talking about the history so that we can fully separate it. Right? I'm not saying that divination is not possible. That is beyond me. I don't practice it. I do believe that reading the energies are possible. I believe that these cards are able to help you because of the story that they tell. And because of the story that they tell, or because people don't know the story that they tell, they attribute things to the cards that aren't necessarily supposed to be there. We will dig a lot more into that, but I wanted to make sure that we separate this from the church. It has nothing to do with the church in and of itself. There is also a tie here to the secret orders. Now, I am fully unencumbered by any of the orders. I have no vow of silence. I have no reason to hold back anything that I have discovered. Nobody has initiated me. Nobody has sworn me to secrecy. I made no blood oaths. I don't do any of the things associated with it. I don't even really participate in ritual magic. I believe in manifestation. I believe in energetic manipulation, but it is all me based, right? I am changing me into the me that God wants me to be. And so I do believe that the occult is a real thing. I do believe that there are diametric powers, right? You have good and evil. I believe that. There are forces acting both for good and evil. I believe that. But these tools are neutral, right? All of the tools are neutral, whether you're talking about crystals and stones, or whether you're talking about wands, or whether you're talking about cups, or whether you're talking about tarot cards. The tools are neutral. It is the application thereof which makes them either good or bad. You are the deciding point in this situation. It is not a church, despite what they may tell you. It is not a religious practice, despite what they might tell you. What is contained in the tarot is a story of enlightenment, and it is for your benefit. It was recorded for you, and then it was lost. Ironically, right around the time that the church split, and they started burning people for having better knowledge. Next up, Section 4, the Tarot in History. For those who don't know, the link is provided down below to the original source material, and I have just skipped over 2 sections. I skipped over the section of the Major Arcana, and I skipped over the section of the Minor Arcana. We will be dealing with those in great detail in the next video, and so we're not going to spend the time on those today. This is about laying out the groundwork and the history, and honestly, I don't even expect many people to make it this far in the video, so if you did, let me know down below. Our next immediate concern is to speak of the cards and their history, so that the speculations and reveries which have been perpetuated and multiplied in the schools of occult research may be disposed of once and for all, as intimated in the preface hereto. Let it be understood at the beginning of this point that there are several sets or sequences of ancient cards, which are only in part of our concern. The Tarot of the Bohemians by Papus, which I have recently carried through the press, revising the imperfect rendering, has some useful information in this connection, and except for the omission of dates and other evidences of the archaeological sense, it will serve the purpose of the general reader. I do not propose to extend it in the present place in any manner that can be called considerable, but certain additions are desirable, and so also is a distinct mode of presentation. I'm at a really awkward point in my voice. Right, this is my normal voice, but if I try to project it, it's still a little bit wavery. But it's so strong that I can't really maintain the higher voice anymore. So I'm really in a weird transitionary place with my throat. So I'm sorry if it gets a little bit rough to keep up with the voice changing back and forth. I am trying to work that out. This is in large part helping with that. Manifestation is helping with that. It is all coming together in perfect timing, but I'm at an awkward stage at the moment. Among ancient cards which are mentioned in connection with the tarot, there are, firstly, those of Baldini, which are the celebrated set attributed by tradition to Andrea Mantegna, though this view is now generally rejected. Their date is supposed to be about 1470, and it is thought that there are not more than 4 collections extant in Europe. A copy or reproduction referred to, 1485, is perhaps equally rare. A complete set contains 50 numbers, divided into 5 deniaries or sequences of 10 cards each. There seems to be no record that they were used for the purposes of a game, whether of chance or skill. They could scarcely have lent themselves to divination or any form of fortune-telling, while it would be more than idle to impute a profound symbolical meaning to their obvious emblematic designs. The first denary embodies conditions of life as follows: the beggar, the knave, the artisan; the merchant, the noble, the knight; the doge, the king, the emperor, and the pope. The second contains the muses and their divine leader, Calliope, Urania, Terpsichore, Erato, Polyhymnia, Thalia, Melpomene, Euterpe, Clio, and Apollo. The third combines part of the liberal arts and sciences with other departments of human learning as follows: grammar, logic, rhetoric, geometry, arithmetic, music, poetry, philosophy, astrology, and theology. The fourth denary completes the liberal arts and enumerates the virtues: astronomy, chronology, cosmology, temperance, prudence, strength, justice, charity, hope, faith. The fifth and last denary presents the system of the heavens: Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, the eighth sphere, premium mobile, and first cause. We must set aside the fantastic attempts to extract complete tarot sequences out of these denaries. We must forbear for saying, for example, that the conditions of life correspond to the trumps major, and the muses to pentacles, the arts and sciences to cups, and the virtues, etc., to scepters, and the conditions of life to swords. This kind of thing can be done by a process of mental contortion, but it has no place in reality. At the same time, it is hardly possible that individual cards should not exhibit certain and even striking analogies. The Baldini King, Knight, and Knave suggest the corresponding court cards of the minor arcana. The Emperor, Pope, Temperance, Strength, Justice, Moon, and Sun are common to the Mantegna and Trumps Major of any tarot pack. Predisposition has also connected the Beggar and Fool, Venus and the Star, Mars and the Chariot, Saturn and the Hermit, even Jupiter, or, alternatively, the first cause, with the tarot card of the World. But the most salient features of the Trumps Major are wanting in the Mantegna set, and I do not believe that the ordered sequence in the later case gave birth, as it has been suggested, to the others. Romain Merlin maintained this view and positively assigned the Baldini cards to the end of the 14th century. If it be agreed that, except accidentally and sporadically, the Baldini emblematic or allegorical pictures have only a shadowy and occasional connection with tarot cards, and whatever their most probable date, that they can have supplied no originating motive, it follows that we are still seeking not only an origin in place and time for the symbols with which we are concerned, but a specific case of their manifestation on the continent of Europe to serve as a point of departure, whether backward or forward. Now it is well known that in the year 1393, the painter Charles Gringonnier, who for no reason that I can trace has been termed an occultist and Kabbalist by one indifferent English writer, designed and illuminated some kind of cards for the diversion of Charles VI of France while he was in mental ill health. And the question arises whether anything can be ascertained of their nature. The only available answer is that at Paris, in the Bibliothèque du Roi, there are 17 cards drawn and illuminated on paper. They are very beautiful, antique, and priceless. The figures have a background of gold and are framed in a silver border, but they are accompanied by no inscription and no number. It is certain, however, that they included tarot trumps major, the list of which is as follows: Fool, Emperor, Pope, Lovers, Wheel of Fortune, Temperance, Fortitude, Justice, Moon, Sun, Chariot, Hermit, Hanged Man, Death, Tower, and Last Judgment. There are also 4 tarot cards at the Musée Carré, Venice, and 5 others elsewhere, making 9 in all. They include 2 pages or knaves, 3 kings, and 2 queens, thus illustrating the minor arcana. These collections have all been identified with the set produced by Gringonnier, but the inscription was disputed so far back as the year 1848, and it is not apparently put forward at the present day, even by those who are anxious to make evident the antiquity of the tarot. It is held that they are all of Italian and, at least, certainly of Venetian origin. We have in this manner our requisite point of departure in respect of place at least. It has further been stated with authority that Venetian tarots are the old and true form, which is the parent of all the others. But I infer that complete sets of the major and minor arcana belong to much later periods. The pack is thought to have consisted of 78 cards. Notwithstanding, however, the preference shown towards the Venetian tarot, it is acknowledged that some portions of Miniciate or Florentine must be allocated to the period between 1413 and 1418. These were once in the possession of Countess Gonzaga at Milan. The complete Miniciate pack contained 97 cards, and in spite of these vestiges it is regarded, speaking generally, as a later development. There were 41 trumps major, the additional numbers being borrowed or reflected from the Baldini emblematic set. In the court cards of the minor arcana, The knights were monsters of the centaur type, while the knaves were sometimes warriors and sometimes serving men. Another distinction dwelt upon the prevalence of Christian medieval ideas and the utter absence of any Oriental suggestion. The question, however, remains whether there are Eastern traces in any tarot cards. We come, in fine, to the Bolognese tarot, sometimes referred to as that of Venice and having the trumps major complete, but number 20 and 21 are transposed. In the minor arcana, the 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the small cards are omitted, with the result there are 62 cards in all. The termination of the trumps major in the representation of the Last Judgment is curious, and a little arresting as a point of symbolism. But this is all that it seems necessary to remark about the pack of Bologna, except that it is said to have been invented, or, as a tarot, more correctly, modified, about the beginning of the 15th century by an exiled Prince of Pisa, resident in the city. The purpose for which they were used is made tolerably evident by the fact that in 1423 Saint Bernardin of Siena preached against playing cards and other forms of gambling. 40 years later, the importation of cards into England was forbidden, the time being that of the King Edward IV. This is the first certain record on the subject in our country. It is difficult to consult perfect examples of the sets enumerated above, but it is not difficult to meet with the detailed and illustrated descriptions. I should add, provided always that the writer is not an occultist, for accounts emanating from that source are usually imperfect, vague, and preoccupied by considerations which cloud the critical issues. An instance in point is offered by certain views which have been expressed on the Mantegna Codex. If I may continue to dignify card sequences with a title of this kind, it has been ruled, as we have seen, in occult reverie that Apollo and the 9 Muses are in correspondence with pentacles. But the analogy does not obtain in a working state of research, and reverie must border on nightmare before we can identify astronomy, chronology, and cosmology with the suit of cups. The Baldini figures which represent these subjects are emblems of their period and not symbols, like the tarot. In conclusion, as to this part, I observe that there has been a disposition among experts to think that the trumps major were not originally connected with the numbered suits. I do not wish to offer a personal view. I am not an expert in the history of games of chance, and I hate the profanum vulgus of divinatory devices. But I venture, under all reserves, to intimate that if later research should justify such a leaning, then, except for the good old art of fortune-telling and its tamperings with so-called destiny, it will be so much the better for the greater arcana. So far as regards what is indispensable as preliminaries to the historical aspects of tarot cards, and I will now take up the speculative side of the subject and produce its test of value. In my preface to the Tarot of the Bohemians, I have mentioned that the first writer who made known the fact of the cards was the archaeologist Court de Gébelin, who, just prior to the French Revolution, occupied several years in the publication of his Monde Primitif, which extended to 9 quarto volumes. He was a learned man of his epoch, a high-grade Mason, a member of the Historical Lodge of the Philalethes, and a virtuoso with a profound and lifelong interest in the debate on universal antiquities before a science of the subject existed. Even at this day, his memorials and dissertations, collected under the title which I have quoted, are worth possessing. By an accident of things, he became acquainted with the tarot when it was quite unknown in Paris, and at once conceived that it was the remnants of an Egyptian book. He made inquiries concerning it and ascertained that it was in circulation over a considerable part of Europe, Spain, Italy, Germany, and the south of France. It was in use as a game of chance or skill, after the ordinary manner of playing cards. And he ascertained further how the game was played. But it was also in use for the higher purpose of divination or fortune-telling, and with the help of a learned friend, he discovered the significance attributed to the cards, together with the method of arrangement adopted for this purpose. In a word, he made a distinct contribution to our knowledge, and he is still a source of reference. But it is on the question of fact only, and not on the beloved hypothesis that the tarot contains pure Egyptian doctrine. However, he set the opinion, which is prevalent to this day throughout the occult schools, that in the mystery and wonder, the strange night of the gods, the unknown tongue, and the undeciphered hieroglyphs, which symbolized Egypt at the end of the 18th century, the origin of the cards was lost. So dreamed one of the characteristic literati of France, and one can almost understand and sympathize, for the country about the Delta and the Nile was beginning to loom largely in the preoccupation of learned thought, and omni ignotum pro Egyptico was the way the delusion to which many minds tended. It was excusable enough then, but that the madness was continued and within the charmed circle of the occult sciences still passes from mouth to mouth, there is no excuse for this. Let us see, therefore, the evidence produced by M. Court de Gabellin in support of his thesis, and that I may deal justly, it shall be summarized as far as possible in his own words. The figures and arrangement of the game are manifestly allegorical. The allegories are in conformity with the civil, philosophical, and religious doctrine of ancient Egypt. If the cards were modern, no high priestess would be included among the greater arcana. The figure in question bears the horns of Isis. The card which is called the Emperor has a scepter terminating in a triple cross. The card entitled the Moon, who is Isis, shows drops of rain or dew in the act of being shed by the luminary, and these, as we have seen, are the tears of Isis, which swelled the waters of the Nile and fertilized the fields of Egypt. The 17th card, or star, is the dog star, Sirius, which was consecrated to Isis and symbolized the opening of the year. The game played with the tarot is founded on the sacred number 7. I'm going to pause right there. Y'all hold on to that, which was of a great importance in Egypt. The word tarot is pure Egyptian, in which language, tar equals way or road, and ro equals king or royal. It signifies, therefore, the royal road of life. Alternatively, it is derived from A equals doctrine, Rosh equals Mercury equals Teote, and the article T in sum, Terosh, and therefore the tarot is the book of Teote, or the table of the doctrine of Mercury. That's interesting. Remember, Mercury is the soul, right? So this is the table of the doctrine of soul. That's interesting. Such is the testimony, it being understood that I have set aside several casual statements, for which no kind of justification is produced. These, therefore, are 10 pillars which support the edifice of the thesis, and the same are pillars of sand. The tarot is, of course, allegorical, that is to say, it is symbolism, but allegory and symbolism are Catholic, of all countries, nations, and times. They are not more Egyptian than Mexican. They are of Europe and Cathay, of Tibet beyond the Himalayas, and of the London gutters. As allegory and symbol, the cards correspond to many types of ideas and things. They are universal and not particular. And the fact that they do not especially and peculiarly respond to Egyptian doctrine, religious, philosophical, or civil, is clear from the failure of Court de Gabellin to go further than the affirmation. The presence of a high priestess among the trumps major is more easily explained as the memorial of some popular superstition, that worship of a Diana, for example, the persistence of which in modern Italy has been traced with such striking results by Leland. We have also to remember the universality of horns in every cultus, not excepting that of Tibet. The triple cross is preposterous as an instance of Egyptian symbolism. It is the cross of the patriarchal see, both Greek and Latin, of Venice, of Jerusalem, for example. and it is the form of signing used to this day by the priest and laity of the Orthodox Rite. I pass over the idle allusions to the tears of Isis, because other occult writers told us that they are Hebrew Jodes. As regards to the 17th card, it is the star Sirius or another, as predisposition pleases. The number 7 was certainly important in Egypt, and any treatise on numerical mysticism will show that the same statement applies everywhere, even if we elect to ignore the 7 Christian sacraments and the gifts of the divine spirit. Finally, as regards the etymology of the word tarot, it is sufficient to observe that it was offered before the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, and when there was no knowledge of the Egyptian language. The thesis of Court de Gabelin was not suffered to repose undisturbed in the mind of the age, appealing to the learned exclusively by means of the quarto volume. It created the opportunity of tarot cards in Paris, at the center of France and all things French in the universe. The suggestion that divination by cards had behind it the unexpected warrants of ancient, hidden science, and that the root of the whole subject was in the wonder and mystery of Egypt, reflected thereon almost a divine dignity. Out of the purilius of occult practices, cartomancy emerged into fashion and assumed for the moment almost pontifical vestures. The first to undertake the role of batelier, magician, and juggler was the illiterate but zealous adventurer, Aliette. The second was a kind of high priestess, full of intuitions and revelations, was Mademoiselle Lenormand, but she belongs to a later period, while lastly came Julia Orsini, who is referable to a Queen of Cups rather in the tatters of clairvoyance. I am not concerned with these people as tellers of fortune, when destiny itself was shuffling and cutting cards for the game of universal revolution, or for such courts and courtiers as were those of Louis XVIII, Charles IX, and Louis Philippe, but under the occult designation of Atelier, the transliteration of his name, Aliette, that Periquier took himself with high seriousness and posed rather as a priest of the occult sciences than as an ordinary adept in l'art de tirer les cartes. Even at this day, there are people, like Dr. Papist, who have sought to save some part of his bizarre system from oblivion. The long and heterogeneous story of Le Monde Primitif had come to an end of its telling in 1782, and in 1783 the tracts of Atelier had begun pouring from the press, testifying that already he had spent 30, nay, almost 40 years in the study of Egyptian magic, and that he had found the final keys. They were, in fact, the keys of the tarot, which was a book of philosophy, and the book of Teote. But at the same time it was actually written by 17 magi in the Temple of Fire on the borders of the Levant, some 3 leagues from Memphis. It contained the science of the universe, and the cartomancists proceeded to apply it to astrology, alchemy, and fortune-telling, without the slightest diffidence or reserve as to the fact that he was driving a trade. I have really little doubt that he considered it genuine as a métier, and that he himself was the first person whom he conceived concerning his system. But the point which we have to notice is that in this manner was the antiquity of the tarot generally trumpeted forth. The little books of Etienne are proof positive that he did not even know his own language, when in the course of time he produced a reformed tarot. Even those who think of him tenderly admit that he spoiled its symbolism, and in respect of antiquities he had only Court de Gabelin as his universal authority. The cartomancists succeeded one another in the manner in which I have mentioned, and of course there were rival adepts at these less than least mysteries. But the scholarship of the subject, if it can be said to have come into existence, reposed, after all, in the quarto of Court de Gabelin for something more than 60 years. On his authority, there is very little doubt that every one who became acquainted, by theory or practice, by casual or special concern with the question of tarot cards, accepted their Egyptian character. It is said that people are taken commonly at their own valuation, and following as it does the line of least resistance, the unsolicitous general mind assuredly accepts archaeological pretensions in the sense of their own daring and of those who put them forward. The first who appeared to reconsider the subject with some presumptive titles to a hearing was the French writer Duchesne, but I am compelled to pass him over with a mere reference. And so, also, some interesting researches on the general subject of playing cards by Singer in England. The latter believed that the old Venetian game called Trappola was the earliest European form of card playing, that it was of Arabian origin, and that the 52 cards used for the purpose derived from that region. I do not gather that any importance was ever attached to this view. Duchesne and Singer were followed by another English writer, W. H. Hadow, who reviewed the available facts and the cloud of speculations which had already arisen on the subject. This was in 1848, and his work has still a kind of standard authority, but after every allowance for a certain righteousness attributable to the independent mind, it remains an indifferent and even a poor performance. It was, however, characteristic in its way of approaching middle night of the 19th century. Chatto rejected the Egyptian hypothesis, but he was at very little pains concerning it. He would scarcely be held to displace Court de Gobelin if the latter had any firm ground beneath his hypothesis. In 1854, another French writer, Boitou, took up the general question, maintaining the Oriental origin of the tarot cards, though without attempting to prove it. I am not certain, but I think that he is the first writer who definitely identified them with the gypsies. For him, however, the original gypsy home was in India, and Egypt did not therefore enter into his calculation. In 1860 there arose Eliphas Levi, a brilliant and profound illuminate, whom it is impossible to accept, and with whom it is even more impossible to dispense. There was never a mouth declaring such great things of all the Western voices which have proclaimed or interpreted the science called occult and the doctrine called magical. I suppose that, fundamentally speaking, he cared as much or as little as I do for the phenomenal part, but he explained the phenomena with the assurance of one who openly regarded charlatanry as a great means to an end, if used in a right cause. He came unto his own, and in his own received him, also at his proper valuation as a man of great learning, which he never was, and as a revealer of all mysteries, without having been received into any. I do not think that there was ever an instance of a writer with greater gifts, after their particular kind, who put them to such indifferent uses. After all, he was only Etiella a second time in the flesh, endowed in his transmutation with a mouth of gold and a wider casual knowledge. This, notwithstanding, he has written the most comprehensive, brilliant, enchanting history of magic, which has been ever drawn into writing in any language. I'm going to do this. Which has ever been drawn into writing in any language. The tarot and the de Gobelin hypothesis he took into his heart of hearts, and all occult France and all esoteric Britain, Martinist, half-instructed Kabbalist, schools of soi-disant, theosophy, there, here, and everywhere, have accepted his judgment about it with the same confidence as his interpretations of those great classics of Kabbalism which he had skimmed rather than read. The tarot for him was not only the most perfect instrument of divination and the keystone of occult science, but it was the primitive book, the sole book of the ancient Magi, the miraculous volume which inspired all the sacred writings of antiquity. In his first work, Levi was content, however, with accepting the construction of Court de Gobelin and reproducing the seventh trump major with a few Egyptian characteristics. The question of the tarot transmission through the gypsies did not occupy him till J. A. Valiant, a bizarre writer with a not great knowledge of the Romany people, suggested it in his work and on those wandering tribes. The two authors were almost coincident and reflected one another thereafter. It remained for Romain Merlin in 1869 to point out what should have been obvious, namely that cards of some kind were known in Europe prior to the arrival of the gypsies in or about 1417. But as this was their arrival at Lunenburg, and as their presence can be traced antecedently, the correction loses a considerable part of its force. It is safer, therefore, to say that the evidence for the use of the tarot by Romany tribes was not suggested till after the year 1840. The fact that some gypsies before this period were found using cards is quite explicable on the hypothesis not that they brought them into Europe, but found them there already and added them to their stock in trade. We have now seen that there is no particle of evidence for the Egyptian origin of tarot cards. Looking in other directions, it was once advanced on native authority that cards of some kind were invented in China about the year A.D. 1120. Court de Gobelin believed in his zeal that he had traced them to a Chinese inscription of great imputed antiquity, which was said to refer to the subsidence of the waters of the deluge. The characters of this inscription were contained in 77 compartments, and this constitutes the analogy. India had also its tablets, whether cards or otherwise, and these have suggested similar slender similitudes. But the existence, for example, of 10 suits or styles of 12 numbers each, and representing the avatars of Vishnu as a fish, tortoise, bear, boar, lion, monkey, hatchet, umbrella, or bow, as a goat, as a booth, and as a horse in fine, are not going to help us towards the origin of our own trumps major, nor do crowns and harps, nor even the presence of possible coins as a synonym of deniers, and perhaps as an equivalent of pentacles, do much to elucidate the lesser arcana. If every tongue and people and clime and period possess their cards, if with these also they philosophized, divined, and gambled, the fact would be interesting enough. But unless they were tarot cards, they would illustrate only the universal tendency of a man to be pursuing the same things in more or less the same way. I end, therefore, the history of this subject by repeating that it has no history prior to the 14th century, when the first rumors were heard concerning cards. They may have existed 4 centuries, but this period would be early enough if they were only intended for people to try their luck at gambling or their luck at seeing the future. On the other hand, if they contain the deep intimations of secret doctrine, then the 14th century is again early enough, or at least in this respect, we are getting as much as we can. Okay, and so that ends that part, right? And the number 7 is extremely important. The number 8 is also extremely important. I mentioned that for a reason, and I'm going to give you a bit of homework. I normally just point out things, right? But it is almost vital that before you watch the next video, if you have made it this far in this one, that you should watch the fundamental harmonics of the universe, the 8-step harmonics, because it will absolutely come into play in the next video. Alright, so I wasn't sure if we were going to do this, but we're going to go ahead and add this on, even though it is going to make it a very long video. Then we're going to do part 2, the doctrine behind the veil, and this is where we'll wrap it up for today. This is the last long section for today. So, the tarot and secret tradition. The tarot embodies symbolical presentations of universal ideas, behind which lie all the implicits of the human mind, and it is in this sense that they contain secret doctrine, which is the realization by the few of truths embedded in the consciousness of all, though they have not passed into express recognition by ordinary men. This theory is that this doctrine has always existed. That is to say, it has been excogitated in the consciousness of an elect minority, that it has been perpetuated in secrecy from one to another, and has been recorded in secret literatures, like those of alchemy and Kabbalism. That's in the video tomorrow. that it is contained also in those initiated mysteries of which Rosicrucianism offers an example near to our hand in the past, and craft masonry a living summary or general memorial for those who can interpret its real meaning. Behind the secret doctrine, it is held that there is an experience or practice by which the doctrine is justified. It is obvious that in a handbook like the present, I can do little more than state the claims, which, however, have been discussed at length in several of my other writings, while it is designed to treat two of its more important phases in books devoted to the secret tradition in Freemasonry and in Hermetic literature, as regards tarot claims. It should be remembered that some considerable part of the imputed secret doctrine has been presented in the pictorial emblems of alchemy, so that the imputed Book of Teote is in no sense a solitary device of this emblematic kind. Now, alchemy had two branches, and as I have explained fully elsewhere, and the pictorial emblems which I have mentioned are common to both divisions. Its material side is represented in the strange symbolism of the Mutus Liber, printed in the great folios of Mangetus. There the process for the performance of the great work of transmutation is depicted in 14 copper plate engravings, which exhibit the different stages of the matter in the various chemical vessels. Above these vessels there are mythological, planetary, solar, and lunar symbols, as if the powers and virtues which, according to the Hermetic teaching, preside over the development and perfection of the metallic kingdom were intervening actively to assist the two operators who are toiling below. The operators, curiously enough, are male and female. The spiritual side of the alchemy is set forth in the much stranger emblems of the Book of Lambspring, and of this I have already given a preliminary interpretation to which the reader may be referred. The tract contains the mystery of what is called the mystical or arch-natural elixir, being the marriage of the soul and the spirit in the body of the adept philosopher, and the transmutation of the body as the physical result of this marriage. I have never met with more curious intimations than this one little work. It may be mentioned as a point of fact that both tracts are very much later in time than the latest date that could be assigned to the general distribution of tarot cards in Europe by the most drastic form of criticism. They belong, respectively, to the end of the 17th and 16th centuries. As I am not drawing here on the font of imagination to refresh that as fact and experience, I do not suggest that the tarot set the example of expressing secret doctrine in pictures, and that it was followed by Hermetic writers. But it is noticeable that it perhaps the earliest examples of this art. It is also the most Catholic, because it is not, by attribution or otherwise, a derivative of any one school or literature of occultism. It is not of alchemy or Kabbalism or astrology or ceremonial magic. But, as I have said, it is the presentation of universal ideas by means of universal types, and it is in the combination of these types, if anywhere, that it presents secret doctrine. That combination may, ex hypothesi, reside in the numbered sequence of its series, or in their fortuitous assemblage by shuffling, cutting, and dealing, as in ordinary games of chance played with cards. Two writers have adopted the first view without prejudice to the second, and I shall do well, perhaps, to dispose at once of what they have said. Mr. MacGregor Mathers, who once published a pamphlet on the tarot, which was in the main devoted to fortune-telling, suggested that the 22 trumps major could be constructed, following their numerical order, into what he called a connected sentence. It was, in fact, the heads of a moral thesis on the human will, its enlightenment by science, represented by the magician, its manifestation by action, a significance attributed to the high priestess, its realization, the empress, in deeds of mercy and beneficence, which qualities were allocated to the emperor. He spoke also in the familiar, conventional manner of prudence, fortitude, sacrifice, hope, and ultimate happiness. But if this or the message of the cards. It is certain that there would be no excuse for publishing in them at this day, or taking the pains to elucidate them at some length. In his Tarot of the Bohemians, a work written with zeal and enthusiasm, sparing no pains of thought or research within its particular lines, but unfortunately without real insight, Dr. Papus has given us a singularly elaborate scheme of the trumps major. It depends, like that of Mr. Mathers, from their numerical sequence, but exhibits their interrelation in the divine world, the macrocosm and the microcosm. In this manner we get, as it were, a spiritual history of man, or of the soul coming out from the eternal, passing into the darkness of the material body, and returning to the height. I think that the author is here within a measurable distance of the right track, and his views are to this extent informing, but his method, in some respects, confuses the issues and the modes and planes of being. That is what I am clarifying tomorrow. The trumps major have been treated in the alternative measure which I have mentioned, and Grand Orient in his Manual of Cartomancy, under the guise of a mode of transcendental divination, has really offered the result of a certain illustrative readings of the cards, when arranged as the result of a fortuitous combination by means of shuffling and dealing. The use of divinatory methods, with whatsoever intention and for whatsoever purpose, carries with it two suggestions. It may be thought that the deeper meanings are imputed rather than real, but this is disposed of by the fact of certain cards, like the Magician, the High Priestess, the Wheel of Fortune, the Hangman, the Tower, or Maison Dieu, and several others which do not correspond to conditions of life, arts, sciences, virtues, or other subjects contained in the deniaries of the Baldini emblematic figures. They are also proof positive that obvious and natural moralities cannot explain the sequence. Such cards testify concerning themselves after another manner, and although the state in which I have left the tarot in respect of its historical side is so much the more difficult as it is so much the more open, they indicate the real subject matter with which we are concerned. The methods show also that the trumps major, at least, have been adapted to fortune-telling rather than belong thereto. The common divinatory meanings which will be given in the third part are largely arbitrary attributions, or the product of secondary and uninstructed intuition, or at the most they belong to the subject on a lower plane, apart from the original intention. If the tarot were a fortune-telling in the root matter thereof, we should have to look in very strange places for the motive which devised it, to witchcraft and the Black Sabbath, rather than to any secret doctrine. The two classes of significance which are attached to the tarot in the superior and inferior worlds, and the fact that no occult or other writer has attempted to assign anything but a divinatory meaning to the minor arcana, justify in yet another manner the hypothesis that the two series do not belong to one another. It is possible that their marriage was effected, first, in the tarot of Bologna, by that Prince of Pisa whom I have mentioned in the first part. It is said that his device obtained for him public recognition and reward from the city of his adoption, which would scarcely have been possible, even in those fantastic days, for the production of a tarot which only omitted a few of the small cards. But as we are dealing with a question of fact, which has to be accounted for somehow, it is conceivable that a sensation might have been created by a combination of the minor and gambling cards with the philosophical set, and by the adaptation of both to a game of chance. Afterwards it would have been further adapted to that other game of chance which is called fortune-telling. It should be understood here that I am not denying the possibility of divination, but I take exception as a mystic to the dedications which bring people into these paths, as if they had any relation to the mystic quest. The tarot cards which are issued with the small edition of the present work that is to say, with the key to the tarot, have been drawn and colored by Miss Pamela Coleman Smith, and will, I think, be regarded as very striking and beautiful in their design alike and execution. They are reproduced in the present enlarged edition of the key as a means of reference to the text. They differ in many important respects from the conventional archaisms of the past and from the wretched products of colportage, which now reaches us from Italy, and it remains for me to justify their variations as far as the symbolism is concerned. That for once, in modern times, I present a pack which is the work of an artist does not, I presume, call for apology, even to the people, if any remain among us, who used to be described and to call themselves very occult. If any one will look at the gorgeous tarot valet or knave who is emblazoned on one of the page plates of Chatto's Facts and Speculations Concerning the History of Playing Cards, he will know that Italy, in the old days, produced some splendid packs. I could only wish that it had been possible to issue the restored and rectified cards in the same style and size. Such a course would have done fuller justice to the designs, but the result would have proved unmanageable for those practical purposes which are connected with cards, and for which allowance must be made, whatever my views thereon. For the variations in the symbolism by which the designs have been affected, I alone am responsible. In respect to the major arcana, they are sure to occasion criticism among students, actual and imputed. I wish, therefore, to say, within the reserves of courtesy and la haute convenance belonging to the fellowship of research, that I care nothing utterly for any view that may find expression. There is a secret tradition concerning the tarot, as well as a secret doctrine contained therein. I have followed some part of it without exceeding the limits which are drawn about matters of this kind and belong to the laws of honor. This tradition has two parts, and as one of them has passed into writing, it seems to follow that it may be betrayed at any moment, which will not signify, because the second, as I have intimated, has not so passed at present as is held by very few indeed. The purveyors of spurious copy and traffickers in stolen goods may take note of this point if they please. I ask, moreover, to be distinguished from 2 or 3 writers in recent times who have thought fit to hint that they could say a good deal more if they liked, for we do not speak the same language, but also from any one who, now or hereafter, may say that she or he will tell all, because they have only the accidents and not the essentials necessary for such disclosure. If I have followed on my part the counsel of Robert Burns, by keeping something to myself which I scarcely tell to any, I have still said as much as I can. It is the truth after its own manner, and as much as may be expected or required in those outer circles where the qualifications of special research cannot be expected. In regard to the minor arcana, there are the first in modern, but not all in all times, to be accompanied by pictures, in addition to what is called the pips, that is to say, the devices belonging to the numbers of the various suits. These pictures respond to the divinatory meanings which have been drawn from many sources. To sum up, therefore, the present division of this key is devoted to the trumps major. It elucidates their symbols in respect to the higher intention and with reference to the design in the pack. The third division will give the divinatory significance in respect to the 78 tarot cards, and with particular reference to the designs of the minor arcana. It will give, in fine, some modes of use for those who require them, and in the sense of the reason which I have already explained in the preface. That which hereinafter follows should be taken for the purposes of comparison in connection with the general description of the old tarot trumps in the first part. There it will be seen that the 0 card of the Fool is allocated, as it always is, to the place which makes it equivalent to the number 21. This arrangement is ridiculous on the surface, which does not much signify, but it is also wrong in the symbolism, Nor does this fare better when it is made to replace the 22nd point of the sequence. Etiella recognized the difficulties of both attributions, but he only made bad worse by allocating the Fool to the place which is usually occupied by the Ace of Pentacles, as the last of the whole tarot series. This rearrangement has been followed by Papus recently in Litero Divinator, where the confusion is of no consequence, as the findings of fortune-telling depend upon fortuitous positions and not upon essential place in the general sequence of the cards. I have seen yet another allocation of the zero symbol, which no doubt obtains in certain cases, but it fails on the highest planes for the present requirements. It would be idle to carry the examination further. And I actually have the answer to why that is there, and we will talk about that tomorrow. I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping this up because we're getting long. If you have made it this far, I do appreciate it, and I want to make some things really clear, right? If you made it this far, then you are worthy of the knowledge. I am a breaker of narratives. If you don't believe that, you can go back through my Bible study, and I break several narratives along the way. You can go back to several of my playlists, and we break some of the narratives along the way. What we're being told here by Mr. White is, in fact, that there is a significance attributed to the story in the tarot. Now you can go and you can find the Fool's Journey. That is one of the two stories that is contained in the tarot, but it is incomplete. Without the missing pieces, the journey cannot complete. There is a reason why the zero is placed where it is, and we will talk about that tomorrow. We will at least start. I don't know that we will be able to go through the entire thing because there is so much here. This is a journey. This is a journey of the soul. This is the journey of enlightenment told in total. And we will be spending a good bit of time detailing that. This will absolutely step on some of the toes of people who read tarot now. That is not an intentional thing, right? I believe in the reading of the energies. I believe that the placement of the cards are being directed by something other than. And so these cards can serve two separate purposes. The one purpose is the reading of the energy, not necessarily for future fortune telling, but to get a read on the current situation and the immediate future and past. Not in long terms, because that is not as set, but the energies are very much in play right now. Right? And what you read in the tarot is the energies in play right now. This second story is for you. It is for you to internalize. It is not about remembering what the cards do. It is not remembering what they mean when they are played out. There is a very, very intentional sequence of events that is being told in the tarot. Another point that was touched on right here was the major trumps and the minor trumps. The major trumps tell the minor story. The minor trumps tell the full story, and in my estimation, what appears to have happened was that they took part of the minor trumps and made the major trumps out of them. If you don't know what that means, watch the video tomorrow, because it will be made pretty plain. I have received direct revelation on a lot of things. I went into this with the direct revelation already of what the story is. I already know the sequence of events. I already know the key numbers that play a part. I already know the cycles. I already know the choices. I already knew every single point that will be made in tomorrow's video before I actually sat down and really looked at the tarot cards. So while what I have had revealed to me through direct revelation is not necessarily related to the tarot. It is related to the journey of the soul, which is described by the tarot. Part of that he touched on in here, and he also touched on in here that he believed that. He believed that there is a greater story, but that he wasn't going to tell you because he is bound by some of the restrictions that I am not. I am going to tell you, despite what he said in here, that I am going to reveal. I am, starting tomorrow, going to reveal the hidden journey within the tarot. I don't do it with delusions of grandeur, right? But as I was studying through the tarot so that I could understand whether I wanted to mess with them or not. Here's an important part, right? This is a sidetrack, kind of. If you go back and you look through the Pitcast playlist, you can see where I have worked through the works of Plato. And in the works of Plato, we talked about Socrates, right? Socrates. And Socrates had a demon. That's what he called it, not necessarily the Catholic demon, because, or the Christian demon, because his entire belief system was completely devoid of anything Jewish, any Kabbalah, any Christianity, any Eastern mysticism. His position was based off of the religions in Europe. And he had this demon, which in his service never steered him wrong. If he was going to do something wrong, it would speak and tell him not to. And if he didn't do it, it worked out for his betterment. It only spoke up when there was something wrong. I have something similar. This is going to trigger a lot of people. I don't call it a demon, right? It's just the voice of God. That's what I call it. And he directs me in certain ways. And when I see things, sometimes he takes it to another level for me, right? When I have the key, as we saw in Purgatory, right? I saw where the key fit, and then it unlocked that whole book. That whole section was unlocked, and we could talk about it in very real terms about how it is part of your journey of ascension. The same thing happened here in the tarot. I have received direct confirmations that I am on the right track with this. I have received direct confirmations that I am supposed to disseminate this information. I say that to point out that I could be wrong, right? This is me taking my own preconceived notions and inserting them upon something of historical significance, of which I do not even have the original source materials. I believe that what they did in the Rider-Waite deck was to put into effect the actual journey of the soul within the limitations of the secret societies. So if you were initiated within the societies, these clubs that swear you to secrecy and don't allow you to say things, but if you're initiated, they tell you this, what I'm about to reveal to you tomorrow. Right? They tell you these things in these clubs, in my estimation, but that is pure speculation on my part. That is me trying to read truth from what is told to us. He said in here, he believes that what he did was put together the story, but that he is not permitted to dispense the meaning of the story to you. Instead, it is couched in a game so that you don't believe that there is something there, because not everybody is worthy of ascension. Everybody is worthy of ascension, but not everybody is willing to put in the work for ascension. And if you have the keys, you can use them whether it is for good or for evil. I make great pains to point out the fact that I have an entire playlist on how to do this stuff correctly so that you do not face the repercussions. We will get further revealing on that tomorrow. And that's going to be the last teaser. Y'all make sure y'all check in tomorrow. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a set of somewhat complicated topics. This was about laying the groundwork. I am a big one for laying the groundwork before we talk about the more extensive issues involved. Hopefully I brought enough to lay the groundwork without confusing the waters for the video tomorrow. The video that is coming is going to be different, right? It will in part incorporate the hero's journey, so you can go and find that story in a lot of places. The journey that I'm going to take you on is just a little bit different. If you like what I'm doing here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment. If you really like it, hit me with those super things. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit State. Peace.